All right, hello there. This is the podcast, A Lesson Before Writing. This is episode 36, which, if my math is still valid, that means our monthly podcast. This is 3 solid years of recording, which is pretty cool. So we've got 36 episodes we're about to put in the can, and we've got some bonus episodes. So people should check those out as well. Ted Morrissey here with my co-hosts, one of whom is Brady Harrison. This is Brady's most recent book we've published, A Journey to Al Ramel, recently a finalist for the Big Other Book Award in Fiction, which is very, very cool. Touch on some of that stuff. Also here with Grant Tracey, 5-time Pushcart Prize nominee and author of the Hayden Fuller Mystery Series, as well as other noir, which we'll also talk about. And I'll just mention while I'm at it, this is my most recent book, Aspiring Child, a biography of Mary W. Shelley in sonnets. Had some good news related to that recently. I'll also plug, as publisher of 12 Winters Press, that we are working on the paperback edition of John Paul Jaramillo's Carlos Montoya. We actually published the hardcover edition in 2023. And normally we bring the paperback and the digital editions out very quickly. For whatever reason, that didn't happen, kind of got off track, and etc. But anyway, we're about to bring that out. And in the meantime, the book is a finalist for the Latino Book Award from the International Latino Book Award contest. So very cool stuff there. All right. Yeah, Grant, you're looking very noir there. Brady and I mentioned your lighting. And you just had a new story published or accepted, maybe published.
Oh, it's published. It's online. You can check it out.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. I know it's an Eddie Sands story.
Yeah, it's called what the hell is it called? No, I think it's called No Lights in Prison or Lights in Prison. I can't remember. It's a line in the story, but it gets corrected. But yeah, it's an Eddie Sands story. He takes a woman back to her house. He's working the day shift because he's trying to make some extra money, so he's doubling his time driving cab. He's picking up one of the drivers is on vacay, and so he has a whole different clientele. But lo and behold, as often happens in an Eddie Sands story, sudden violence, and the woman goes to her home. Eddie's walking back down the driveway. He's by the swale in the front yard and hears gunshots. And then she comes staggering out, and some guy comes out, angular shadows, and starts shooting at her and at him. And Eddie ducks into the swale. Not much coverage, but he starts picking up the rocks and hurling them. The guy backs up, pops on a motorcycle, drives off. Eddie runs to the wounded woman, and she dies in his arms, and that's basically the opening scene, and that's the hook. Kind of a home invasion story, but not things aren't what they seem, as usual in my Eddie Sands stories. So there's the hook. So enjoy. It's a Freedom Fiction Journal. It's the fourth story of mine they've taken, and all of them have been editor's choice, which is kind of like a nice honor to get. So I'm very pleased with the outfit and pleased that they like my work. So yeah, that's the brand new one. That's
very cool. Very cool. Well, anyone who isn't completely familiar with our podcast and your work, your main focus has been the Hayden Fuller mysteries. Hayden is a PI, 1960s and 70s Toronto kind of thing. But then you've got this other series you've been developing, Eddie Sands, who is a little bit different character from Hayden, and so on. And I'll just mention that in our most recent edition of yours, Shoeshine Kill, which is a Hayden novel, we did add 4 of your Eddie Sands stories as bonus material to that paperback edition. So that would be a great way to enter into that world as well. Check out A Shoeshine Kill and then read those four Eddie Sands stories. I actually have some more things I want to talk to you about regarding noir and seeming to be having a moment now. But let me get Brady in on the conversation here. Brady just back from Italy. So you've had a big month or so. You retired officially, and then you jetted off to Italy. Your book was a finalist for the Big Other Award, and the company you were keeping was pretty impressive. So you've been having a pretty good set of weeks here, Brady. I presume you're feeling pretty good about all that.
Yeah, I feel great. Just to back up for a moment, congratulations to Grant. And, uh, for fans of noir, hard-boiled fiction, check out the Hayden Fuller and the Eddie Sands. Like, they're different kinds of cats. They're different kinds of stories. And Eddie Sands stories are really, really tight. Like, they're perfect. So yeah, so check them out. Yeah, no, great. Just delighted with the Big Other nomination. Among the other finalists were writers who have been finalists for the Pulitzer Prize, who've been on the short list for the Booker Prize. Like, it was astonishing to find myself just even for a minute in that such great company. So I was delighted, and yeah, had a trip to Italy to kind of celebrate retirement and have an adventure. And then yesterday, my hiking buddy of 20 some years, and I were up on a mountain. We were probably up around 9,000 feet and managed to get ourselves lost. So, uh, uh, things are great, and working on the new novel and ideas for stories, and like just feeling great. And then life reminds you to have a little humility, and yeah, be careful when you're on really steep pitches. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Well, that's all great. I'm going to mention just very briefly. I've had a little bit of some little bit of good vibes myself. I mentioned my book, Aspiring Child, a biography of Mary W. Shelley in sonnets. So I've been, in addition to writing fiction and everything else, I've been really interested in the sonnet, and I've kind of developed what one reviewer called a neo formal sonnet sort of form based on the Petrarchan sonnet, be a little bit my own version of it as well. And a couple of years ago, a few years ago, I wrote a series of sonnets to my father who had passed away. And one of those was published in a journal called Fair Forward. The sonnet was called Galaxy. It received an honorable mention. Again, this is a few years ago. Well, I just recently received an email from the editors that they're going to put out an anthology of all of the poems that have either won or been honorably mentioned over the last few years in their journal. So they're going to include Galaxy in that. So that's very cool to be part of that anthology. And then even more recently, last summer, I had a lot of luck getting these individual Mary Shelley sonnets published here and there. One of the places that took, I don't know, two or three of them, I kind of forget, was the Poetry Lighthouse, which is based in the UK. And they let me know recently that one of the sonnets they published called Reprisal, well, first it was long listed. Now it's been shortlisted for the Poetry Lighthouse Prize. July 5th, they're having a event, and they invited me to read, which I'll do remotely. And then they'll announce the winners and stuff there. So that's all very cool to continue to get some, residual good vibes from those sonnets that I've published here and there. So that's very cool. As you guys know, I've been working on this series of commentaries as I get a bunch of lectures prepared to publish, and I definitely want to touch on some of that stuff. But let me get back, Grant, to this thought I had about noir. We talked last time because of your inclusion in
Yonder.
Dark Yonder. It's right behind me on the bookshelf here. Dark Yonder. I keep thinking Dark Matter, which is different. But and that editor, one of the editors of Dark Yonder, talked about how noir was, kind of making a little bit of a comeback if it ever went away completely. And in the meantime, last couple of weeks, my wife and I watched Spider Noir, which I don't know if you're even familiar with, but it's on
Yeah,
Prime.
I watched
Nicolas
both
Cage.
the color and black and white versions.
We started watching it in black and white and kind of liked it. We like, let's check out the color. Then we say, we can like the color better. But and the thing I think I like about the color is because in my mind, they have used a color palette which is very similar to comic book colors. And if you just stop almost anywhere in those videos, the frame looks so much like a comic book frame. I mean, it's just beautiful the way the lighting is and the way people are framed and fuzzy focus in the background, or just beautiful, beautiful stuff, and just a really entertaining story. So I guess you approve of the revisionist approach to Spider-Man by
Yeah,
setting it in Depression era New York and all that business. What are some of your thoughts?
yeah, absolutely. I it riffs on a few years back. Marvel put out something called Spider-Man Noir, and I don't remember the whole storyline, but I do remember they had the eugenics movement. It was set in the 30s, and there was I don't know if it was Doc Ock was behind. He was the mad scientist doing stuff to people and programming them in certain ways. And but I really like what they did here with making people into these weird hybrids that and it's tied into the Nazis, but it's pre-Nazi. It's like 1918. It's the end of World War One. Yeah, I thought it was fantastic, and it was really great to see the Zodiac killer, Andy Robinson, who was in Dirty Harry, kind of riffing on the Zodiac killer as Ogden, the son of the Mad Doctor, who's kind of good, kind of she's a classic noir character, a little crazy, trying to help these guys, but by trying to help them, she speeds up the process of the mutation, and they're dying quickly. Um, yeah, I thought it was fantastic, and that's a lot of little nods to other movies. Like obviously, there's a scene from Lady from Shanghai late in the film. There's a wonderful hospital scene. Green, I think it's Green for Danger, or maybe it's no, maybe I have the wrong movie. It might be the one that's Stairway to Heaven, whatever that one's called with David Niven. But anyway, there's a shot in one of those two films where a guy's on a gurney going down through the hospital corridor, and he's looking up and he's seeing all the lights in the ceiling. And later, when Ben Riley, and I wonder if Ben Riley's supposed to be Uncle Ben from the Spider-Man comics, but anyway, Ben Riley is being rushed into for a surgical procedure by this mad doctor, and it's like echoing that noir film, either Green for Danger or the Michael Powell Pressburger film. God damn, what is it? I think it's Stairway to Heaven with David Niven and Kim Hunter. But anyway, a couple of nods right there, and then there's other nods. And of course, I'm a big James Cagney fan, so the fact that there's a moment where Nick Cage as Ben Riley goes to the theater and starts mimicking James Cagney to get back speech patterns because he's part spider, he's part arachnid. He had to rewire his brain. I love that because I'm a Cagney aficionado. So he's watching actually a scene from The Great Guy where Cagney plays Johnny Cave and he's talking to Mae Clark on the telephone. He goes red hot. It's just a great scene. And so many good things in it. I love the woman that plays his secretary. I think she's probably my favorite character in the miniseries. And then it's got the little orphan kid, like right out of Ragged Dick and the Matchbook, right out of Horatio Alger mythology, who helps out. Just so many nice touches. It's really really quite good. I highly recommend it. And like you, I agree with you. I actually like the color noir guy here with my side lighting going on. I actually like the color version better. I've watched them both, all what is it, 8 episodes, and uh, the colors pop. They've got a little bit of that Dick Tracy, Warren Beatty film thing going, where it looks like four color comic books from the '60s. Definitely,
Mhm.
really cool
Well,
stuff.
well, the costuming is so well done, and you can't pick up a lot of the intricacies of the costuming without watching it in color. Everyone looks like they're just wearing a gray suit or a gray dress, in the black and white. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. Actually, I have another show I'm curious if you've seen, but let me get Brady in on this. I know you probably didn't do a lot of watching of TV when you were in Italy. At least I hope to God you didn't. What do you have any thoughts on this? The return of the noir and it's kind of having a moment again here in 2026.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, I defer to both of you. I did enjoy, I can say this is not noir, but I did enjoy the black and silver version of Mad Max Fury Road. I think that's such a great movie. I think the second one with the Thor guy, um and the actress from the Queen's Gambit. I didn't think that movie was nearly so successful, though I have watched that in both the color versions and the black and white. But yeah, so I'm delighted for Grant. Uh, yeah, let's. I mean, I love those old movies. Grant knows this. Grant and this. No, none of our auditors will care, but this is a story that matters a great deal to me. One summer, way back in the day, Grant and Karen were out of town, and so I was house sitting, and Grant had this incredible library of black and white films. I spent a good part of that summer just watching these great noir and these great World War II. You know, I really got hooked on Bogart that summer, and yeah, so I'm not hip yet to the spider thing, but I will check it out. But yeah, I just love black and white noir and watch it routinely. And I really got my start of interest in that from Grant. So yeah, wonderful.
And Nick Cage does this kind of quirky Nick Cage acting thing, which I just love. I mean, he's got kind of goes like this, like he's kind of having a spasm attack of the arachnid part of him taking over. And I love when Nick goes a little over the top. It works for me. I find him one of the most engaging actors. He's a little long in the tooth for the part, but he totally works for me as Ben Riley.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was going to ask you about this other series. It's really weird, by the way, for us to be talking so much about TV series and so forth. Normally, we're all about the literature, and we'll get to it eventually here. But there's another show that is on Apple, and it's called Sugar, and it's starring Colin Farrell. I was going to think for a second, make sure I get my Colin F's correct. Colin Farrell, and he plays kind of it's set in the modern day. I think it's Los Angeles mainly, set in the modern day. But he plays kind of a detective. But the thing is, he is really inspired by the classic noir movies, and he kind of his philosophy in life and what he brings to. He's always searching for missing people, the down and out people who need his help. Even though they can't pay for it, kind of thing. And so periodically in the series, when he goes home or whatever, he watches these black and white noir movies, and that's where he kind of gets his inspiration. That's kind of where he forms his moral compass, is from these classic detectives or whatever. Have you heard of that series at all? Sugar?
No, but it sounds fascinating. I'll have to track it down.
Yeah, yeah, and like I said, it came out a while. Like the first season was a long time ago, and I didn't know if they were going to have a second season. But just very, very recently, we've seen pop up on Apple that season 2 is now coming out, and so that's what made me think of it. But again, not noir exactly, but certainly a series that pays homage to the noir genre with a character who clearly, like I said, develops his moral paradigm based on those classic gumshoe detectives and so forth. So
Yeah, I think what Brady was talking about a few minutes ago. I mean, I would call that neo-noir. I mean, there's all this, the shadows of noir blend into other genres. Science fiction, westerns, whatever. It's omnipresent, and I think a lot of filmmakers, they go to film school and they see these films, and then they pay homage to them in their films. So it's exciting. I love that kind of quoting in movies.
Well, I don't think we've asked you, but your first movie came out this past year. You've had the honor of being included in some film festivals. Are you thinking about doing another film, or is that kind of out of your system now? Or
No,
what do you got going on in that regard?
No, I'm acting in one right now and helping the director. I'm working the boom, the sound mic. Actually, we have a shoot today. But I wrote a short script based on a short story of mine called Essentials, and it's about a kid who loses his dad and goes to his father's apartment and is trying to find some kind of legacy. Because I love those plays, American plays of the 50s, like Cat in a Hot Tin Roof. Well, they're late 40s, 50s. Cat in a Hot Tin Roof's 50s, but Streetcar and Death of a Salesman, which are all about legacy. What do you leave behind? There's the mansion that Blanche comes from that's been destroyed. There's Willie, committing suicide to give a legacy to his son, and Big Daddy trying to decide what son's going to get, his properties when he dies. And so this boy is searching for something from his father, and he goes to his dad's apartment. His dad was estranged from the family. After the dad's dead, he died of a heart attack. And suddenly this woman appears, and he finds out she was his tutor and was teaching him to read the classics of literature. And he had been reading, Percival Everett's James, and he'd been reading Hemingway's In Our Time. Of course, I got to get a Hemingway thing in there, Malamud's The Assistant, etc. And so that's kind of the heart of the story. So it's going to be about a 25-minute movie. It's a real short piece, but based on a short story of mine. So we're planning to shoot that as soon as I get done with this production I'm doing now for my buddy Joe. So probably September, October. It'll probably be a 5 or 6 day shoot. It's I need to find an apartment to film it. I've got a diner set up. So it's got 3 scenes, 2 in the apartment, 1 in a diner. One's a kind of flashback dream sequence. It's not quite really happening, but it's sort of happening. It's like that liminal space, like in Death of a Salesman, where Willie's recalling things, but it's also his imagination. So we don't know how much of it is real and how much is imagined. So anyway, yeah, that's on the docket. So Essentials, the film, that's something we'll be working on in a couple of months.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Brady, do you have any thoughts about any of that? Anything triggered there for you?
That you guys are incredibly prolific, and it's a lot of pressure on mere mortals who keep your company.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. I'll put that on our website. That quote from Brady.
I don't know, man. You guys are I'm just a pushcart prize nominee. You guys are like finalists for big prizes and stuff. I mean, you guys are the superstars. I feel like, I'm the working class guy with the lunch bucket. You guys are. I'm not being falsely honest. I mean, you guys. I mean, you're rubbing shoulders, Brady, with big wheels. Ted's won awards and he's been invited here and there. And yeah, you guys. Yeah, I mean that sincerely. You guys are the top of the charts, man.
Well, thank you for that. I don't agree with you in terms of your positioning there in the constellation, but hey, I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I've done before. We are going to have a featured story from Swamp Ape Review. We usually like the last half hour or so of our podcast, and I don't want to change that up. I do want to, save that. But I was reading like the editor's note, which I did not send to you guys, so I know you haven't read this. And there's a paragraph here in like the letter from the editors, which introduces the issue that we're going to talk about a story in. And it's just so well written and so profound, this little paragraph, that I wanted to share it and then just kind of have you guys react to it, et cetera. And the editors, by the way, I'm going to get both of their names wrong, which I apologize for, but co-editors for this issue, Sarah V. Dimitrascu and Sierra Yetka, perhaps. And this is produced by the Creative Writing Program at Florida Atlantic University. Okay, so again, we're going to talk about a story from this edition a little bit later, but this is a paragraph from their opening remarks. They write, "This year we felt it was crucial to address the topic of resistance. To us, resistance is about standing up for your rights and beliefs, especially that when that feels hopeless to do. Resistance is refusing to give in to oppressive powers and letting your voice be heard. What better way than to do so through art? We want you, our readers, to know that Swamp Ape Review stands for universal justice and freedom. Our state government and president do not define us, our beliefs, or what we choose to publish. We will always be a literary magazine for the wacky and weird, the swamp, and the people." And, on our little promos and advertisements for the podcast, I always put a little sticker-like thing that says "Join the Resistance." So they're talking about resistance there. Let me kick it over to you, Brady. That little paragraph. I know you agree with it, but is there anything that you would say in agreement or in response to that?
Oh, well, yeah, thank you for reading that, and thanks to the two editors for writing it. It's such an eloquent statement. I think in our day and age, reading and being human and writing and reading and thinking, doing our own work, those are all forms of resistance. And I don't suppose what I'm about to say would be a popular thing and not, and the kind of thing that people would yell at one for, but there's this kind of stupid out there that is being reveled in. And so, yeah, getting a chance to read some art, to do art, to write poetry, to write fiction, to make a film, like those are great human endeavors, and they're contrary in so many ways to the current ethos of willful uh, insert the word. I'm going to withhold what but yeah, yeah, I agree completely, and a nicely courageous statement.
Grant, your thoughts on all that?
Oh, totally echoing what Brady said. Very eloquent statement, and resistance can take a lot of forms. I mean, there's sort of the political resistance to totalitarianism, to thought control, that what we're living in right now, to squashing identity politics and social justice. But there's also resistance of form, and what I mean by that is, like, for me as a writer, I write a lot of noir, but I'm sort of both indebted in a nostalgic way to the past, but I'm also resisting some of those narrative patterns and wanting to do something more, something different, and not just so, like, for me, violence towards women is something I really, really explore. And I think crime writers have been doing that for a long, long time. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but it always surprises me once in a while. I'll read a great work of art by a John D. MacDonald, who I admire immensely. But in one of his, well, more than one, a couple of his novels, he has characters recommending to another male character to smack their wives around, get them in line. That's how you'll have a good marriage. And it's like taken seriously. And I'm like appalled by this kind of stuff. God, I wish I could remember the title. It has Cinderella in the title, and one of the women's name is Janice. But God, I can't remember the exact title. Anyway, so I'm resisting against that. At the same time, I'm leaning into. I've always liked low culture stuff, or what might be seen as low status stuff, pulp, comic books. And I guess part of what I've done throughout my whole career is try to elevate that to higher status, to make us appreciate the way the French film critics did genre films, like films of Sam Fuller, films of Howard Hawks, and seeing them as auteurs, as people with creative spark, and whose films should be revered, and admired. Nicholas Ray. So that's kind of been my thing. So I think resistance can take a lot of forms, but I really, really like the statement that the two editors put out there. I'm all aboard on that part of resistance too.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, we've obviously in our podcast we try to elevate, a certain kind of aesthetic when it comes to literature and everything else. And I've mentioned this before, but I watch, in the mornings I take about an hour or so while I'm kind of finishing my extreme keto breakfast, and I watch videos, and usually I try to watch the comedians that I missed the night before, but on some days they're not available. So I do watch some book YouTubers, people who review books, talk about literary culture and that kind of thing. And this consistent through line for so many of them is that they're so disappointed in contemporary fiction in particular, because it seems to all be written at such a basic, kind of unintelligent level, aimed at unintelligent readers and so forth. And of course, all the, the book talk influencers who just, blithely say they don't even bother reading the entire book. They just read the dialogue, get the gist of it, and then send it, meteorically into the ether because they like the dialogue or something. I don't know. But here's the thing: there is so much really smart, really good, really complex literature being written and published, but it's just that so much of the reading public who want that sort of thing, they don't even they're not even aware of like its existence. They don't know how to get a hold of it, and so forth and so on. Which, of course, is one of the reasons why we, feature these literary journals that are out there and work that's in there. Obviously, North American Review is publishing great stuff. We've got the 12 Winters Journal online where we publish great stuff. So there is great writing being written, being published. It's just that it's so far under the radar for even people who are looking for it. And so I don't know what more to do to get the word out there, but I don't know. At North American Review, how do you guys try to let the world know? Obviously, you're the oldest public, most continuously published journal in North America, so you got that going for you. But still, I'm sure you would want a lot more readers of the work you're putting out. Do you guys talk about that at all?
Yeah, we've being a presence at AWP like you guys were, with 12 Winters Press, it's a really good step. We always have a large constituency that goes there. Our open space, having an online presence has helped. And I think we're just putting out better and better stuff, and word gets around. I mean, we've been getting a lot stronger submissions. I've been doing this since 2000, and the quality of the magazine, I think, in the last 10 years, and we got a nice buzz from BuzzFeed. I mean, there's we've got noticed. We've been, we're starting to get pieces anthologized and best of collections. So people look at those best of collections, they look at what magazines are listed, and then they start sending to those magazines. So, a couple stories that I selected are coming out and sort of the best of Canadian writers or something anthology. So someone will open it up and see the New Yorker and then see North American Review rubbing shoulders with the New Yorker. And we got two pieces in there. So, and then we got another piece accepted for best first stories published in anthology. So that's one of the ways we're trying to get the word out is to get better quality stuff. And the other trick we've done is we've got contributing editors that actually are contributing, like going around. Like when I first started, we just had a list of names and they weren't doing anything. And then we started getting some contacts with people, and then they're contacting people. And then those people are sending us really good stuff. And so that's helpful too. So I think it's just the quality of the work's got better. And so we got a higher Q rating than we used to have.
Now, are you getting more readers reading this great work?
That is a good question. Our what do you call it? Subscription base has remained constant. We haven't lost subscribers, but it's not like we've suddenly, taken off, like an X-15 in 1962. So yeah, no.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be honest here. There's the side of my brain that wants to do company speak, but I'm like, that's bullshit. No, we have not got a whole lot of extra subscribers, but we do seem to have a lot of hits on our when we check that on our web pages, and people seem to be at least looking at and reading some of the content there. And our contests have been doing really well, and that also brings in, it's not just about the money, it brings in future subscribers because then they enter the content and then they stay on board with the magazine. So I'm not a numbers crunching person. I would have to ask Emily about that, but I know we are, shall we say, self-sufficient. We are making enough money to not need big bucks from the institution to support us.
Well, that's great
Yeah,
because that in itself is unusual.
yeah.
So, yeah, that's terrific. Yeah, Brady, thoughts on this? The great writing flying under the radar or things like that?
Well, I think that's the case. One of the great pleasures of being a reader and on the editorial board for 12 Winters Journal is have the opportunity, if you find something great, whisper in Ted's ear, get it in front of other readers. And that has been, very inspiring for me. And it's been one of the great pleasures in the last years to have the opportunity to try to forward some really great writing and see it through and see it in print. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I think it's hard for people, readers, interested readers, I mean, clearly, to find the great stuff that's out there. What I've noticed, of course, I am retired, but over the last many years, before I retired, I used to teach a graduate seminar on contemporary novel. And some of those novels are great. They're brilliant. But then a lot of them, or some of them, not a lot of them, but some of them, there seems to be this, this will sound naive to you guys, but there's this industry that gets revved up to throw, that Paul Simon line, to throw, somebody up the pop charts. And then you read the work and you go, no, this is not any good at all. Why is it so famous? Why is it on the New York Times bestseller list? And so there's the problem of getting attention to and having the opportunity for readers to discover in such a corporate driven environment for regular folks to find really great writers who aren't getting thrown up the New York Times bestseller list. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I see competing energies. There's corporate, and sometimes that can advance a really great book. Lincoln and the Bardo comes to mind. I think that book's a masterpiece. But then small presses and literary journals are bringing, North American Review, 12 Winters Journal, are bringing forth the stuff that people should absolutely be reading. So there's great stuff going on, and it's out there. It's hard for folks to find. Yeah. Hard to get the attention to it.
Well, and then the other thing too is, this is a big, my parents didn't make a lot of money. My mom didn't work until I was like a freshman or something in high school. She was a stay-at-home mom. My dad never made much money. We were very, very lower middle class, certainly. But we loved books and we loved reading and all that stuff. And so it was very common for us to give books as presents at Christmas time and birthdays. It was a big deal. I remember I got the entire, Fellowship of the Ring series for a birthday, like when I was in junior high. And oh my gosh, I was just over the moon. I just loved it. And we, and even though we didn't have a lot of money and had a very small house, all that stuff, we had books in the house, and that was great. And now we've got this thing in our culture, and I blame that Marie Kondo or whatever her name is, where people feel like having books around is clutter, and they don't want to have books around their house. And so a lot of people who are avid readers, they are very opposed to buying a book. And granted, the hardcover is very expensive, and then it is just sort of sitting there on your shelf or whatever. And so they use the library, which obviously I've been a librarian for 25 years plus, two and up top of everything else. And so I'm very obviously, pro-library, but most libraries have very limited budgets, very limited shelf space. So they get the books they know are going to circulate, the James Pattersons, the Danielle Steeles, the David Baldaccis, the Nora Roberts, on and on and on. And they don't get books from smaller presses and self-published books that have gotten good reviews and won awards, because they don't anticipate that people are going to come in asking for the book, because people don't know it exists. They don't even know the author exists. And on those rare occasions that someone does come in and want, a book in translation they've heard about, maybe they read a review in the New York Times Book Review or whatever, we've got such an efficient interlibrary loan system, which is fantastic. But basically 1 or 2 copies for the entire state of Illinois is plenty, and so that happens to me a lot. In fact, I just requested a book yesterday that Lance Olson, the author, we're Facebook friends, and he was singing his praises. Earth 7, I think is the name of the novel. And so I went, and there's like 2 copies in the entire state, and I requested one. I'll probably wait 6 months for it to come in or something, you know? So my point here is that there's this been cultural shift where people feel like it's bad a bad use of their money to buy books, but yet they can't go to libraries and find the kind of books we're talking about. We don't have a good bookstore here in Springfield, Illinois, other than the Barnes and Noble, and it's mostly stationary now. They've got a couple of, I think you can buy like the Paris Review there, maybe two or three other literary magazines if you want to, but otherwise, there's no really good contemporary work being offered at Barnes and Noble or whatever. So anyway, the work's being done, it's being published. It's just so hard to get over that hump of readers who are looking for that kind of thing, even knowing that it exists. I don't know, Grant, you're kind of nodding away there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Ted, back to when I was in high school, and um, I wanted to read great works of literature. I mean, we'd studied Thomas Hardy, and some of the old chestnuts, Great Expectations, Dickens. But I wasn't given access to that knowledge in high school. So I remember one summer before I started college, I started reading books that I thought were important, that I'd read somewhere were important. And so I read On the Road by Kerouac. I read Blue Highways by Sun Yat Moon or whatever, which I thought was just, all right. And I read some other stuff. I read Harlan Ellison. Um, and then I get to college and suddenly, I'm discovering all the, like, I didn't even know Moby Dick existed till I got to college. So like, here's a guy who's got a PhD in English who coming out of high school didn't have access to this knowledge that I needed to get from professors and academe to it's like a triangle. There's like this little at the top of the triangle, people that sort of in the know like us. We've studied a lot of literature, we've read a lot of literature, we seek out, small press publishing, that sort of stuff. And I'm thinking back to when I was 18, 19 years old and what little access I had to that world. I enter academia, I get more access. I'm an English major, I get more access. And, now, I work with people coming out of creative writing programs. So there's like Molly Antipal was someone I discovered because a friend of mine getting his MFA in Colorado had read her and he told me about her. And then I read her and I was like, holy shit, this is great. So and then there's Canadian writers I discovered from other people that are gone through MFA programs and told me, no, haven't you heard of this writer? I'm like, no, yeah, my Subterranean Year. You got to read that story. It's an incredible story. And then I got the whole collection of stories by that writer. God, I can't remember his name. Jewish writer from Latvia. Oh, geez, short story collection. Natasha and other stories, but I can't remember his name. Anyway, great collection. Um, and that's so my knowledge is because I'm in a certain field. Like if I was studying chemistry and wanted to read good books, when I know all this stuff that I know, it's a way you get acclimated by the field you're in. And I think that's a little bit unfortunate that our knowledge is our way of expanding this is so small. It's such a small group of people. And no wonder why people don't know what's good. I didn't know what was good when I was in high school. I didn't know what was good when I was in undergrad completely until I got to grad school and beyond and, started teaching and talking to people at conferences and finding out all kinds of stuff I should be reading and then just devouring as many books as I could get my hands on. So, I'm talking from personal experience and I got a PhD in English literature. That's my story.
Yeah. Brady, thoughts?
Oh, well, the same as you, and I grew up in trailer parks. My folks were blue collar.
Mhm.
Dad was a meat cutter, but we had books around. The Scholastic book thing, when that catalog would come around, that was the sacred text. That
Yes.
was that was the gateway to incredible. I don't even know if it still exists and if they do that. But along the way, and a lot of it is just luck and chance. But I discovered as a kid, in high school, the New Canadian Library. I was reading Morley Callahan and some early Atwood and Sheila Watson and Mordecai Richler. Like those books, that blew my mind. Like that sent me down the road that I'm still on right? And so that was, my good fortune and chance. Yeah, and French writers, yeah, Emily, Marie Claire Blaise, and Gabriel Roy, like just incredible. Yeah. So I wish everybody, all young folks, instead of looking at their phones, would have those kinds of experiences.
Right. Well, one of the things I've been writing about in these commentaries is that I don't have time to get into it here to any degree, but basically, the public school system is run by non-readers, and I'm not going to be able to get into the particulars of that. I do in my I do in my commentaries. So, like what I saw as I mainly taught high school English for 38 years. A large part of that time, I also adjuncted at various universities and so forth. But you have all these people in charge who are not readers, and therefore they don't know how to nurture a reading program. They don't know how they probably even think it's important. And so one of the side effects of that is like when I first started teaching, where I finished my career, I taught there for 25 years. The library was like really big, and we had like a professional school librarian with like a degree in library science who was just excellent. Well, she eventually retired, didn't replace her. Suddenly it's just like a part-time aide there. Every time they needed space for something, usually it was technology. They needed more room for technology, so they cut down the size of the library, got rid of books. Now the library is like the size of an electrical closet, and so I think it's just emblematic of what's happened in education. Is you have people who have taken it over who are not readers, who don't value reading, and so that's kind of what happens. People don't if that isn't being encouraged, if that isn't being nurtured. Just one quick story here. When I was senior in high school, I took a class. I went to Galesburg High School, graduated in 1980. One of the most popular classes in the school was called independent reading, and I had to wait till I was a senior to take it because you had to get on a waiting list to take this class, and it was like basically 30 plus students, and all they did was read. So you went into this class, and everyone, before the bell even rang, there was no chit-chatting with each other, no gossiping. Everyone was there to read. People would take out whatever book they were reading and would sit there. We had long class periods, 50 minutes or something like that, and would read for 50 solid minutes. Nobody would say a word to anybody. And then the bell would ring, and you would reluctantly have to get up, leave the world that you were in. You got your grade based on the number of books you read, and then when you finished the book, you would go sit by Mrs. O'Neill's desk, and the two of you would whisper as quietly as you could, just very, very briefly, where she would ask you a few key questions to satisfy her mind that you read the book and understood it. Then you were off to the next book. But I read 2 or 3 Dickens novels that year. I read Dr. Zhivago. That was the first time I read Jane Eyre. I can't even remember, Ray Bradbury novels, just on and on and on. And it was just a wonderful experience. And I can't even imagine a class like, if you even suggested a class like that now, I don't even know what people would do. They'd look at you like you should be taken off to the loony bin or something. But I don't know. Did you guys have any experiences like that when you were in your formative years? Brady, did you have any independent reading kinds of classes when you were like in high school or that age about?
No, I had the great good fortune to go to it was an academic high school and had the entire high school was 180 kids, each grade 10, 11, 12 with 60 kids. And it was like we read real books and we didn't like I hear now in Montana where I live in high school students never read a whole book. They don't read a entire Shakespeare play. They don't read Dickens, Steinbeck, but I was so fortunate, and I don't know if the world lends itself to blue collar kids having those opportunities anymore. Maybe that world shut out. But yeah, I was lucky. So I had a great experience and read a ton.
Yeah, yeah. Grant,
Yeah,
you said you didn't really get introduced to a lot of those kinds of authors till you went to college, but
right. I mean, when I was in sixth grade, there was this experiment in Ontario called the Open Area, and it was
Yeah,
based.
we had that too.
You
They
had
they were
that
trying
too.
it everywhere.
Yeah, and so there was like it was 3 classrooms, but there was like this wall you could put together or take out, and then this big open area. And I do remember, I don't think it was every day of the week, but several days of the week they would have reading time and you would get to read for like 45 minutes and everybody was quiet and would read. And I was thinking back to when Brady mentioned Scholastic. That's when I read a lot of Scholastic books. And I still remember one of them, Y.A. Tittle, Pro Quarterback. It was a sport lit. It was a sport lit book about a high school kid who is a football player, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. It was Y.A. Tittle and a ghost written by some guy Kaplan or something. I can't remember, but yeah. So I read something else like Hot Rods to Hell or Highway to Hell. It was a bunch of suspense stories, and I think I read a bio on Elvis Presley and some other stuff, but it was. So that was that was the extent of my high literature reading. Like Brady, I grew up in a blue collar household. We our finances were like this. Sometimes we had money, sometimes we had none. Anyway. So we were in townhouses, government housing kind of stuff. Later we had our own house, then we were in townhouses, so, ups and downs. My dad never read. I mean, I saw him read I, the Jury. That might have been where my love of detective fiction started.
Oh, yeah.
And he
Yeah.
read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. He was totally obsessed with Nazis because he was afraid of what might have happened if they'd won the war, because people like us would not be on this planet. So he was that was a big thing for him. My mom, though, she read that library you talked about, Brady, and she tried to, and maybe I just didn't take it seriously. I wish I would have, but she was reading Margaret Atwood, Mordecai Rickler, Ethel Wilson,
Philip Grove. Yeah.
yeah, Philip Grove, whatever,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what's her name? Margaret Lawrence. She loved Margaret Lawrence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stone Angel.
Stone Angel. And
Yeah.
yeah.
She was, and McClellan and Stewart. She was always telling me. That's why in my novel I called the. That's a shout out to the Canadian Library in the broadcaster for the Leaf games in my
Yeah.
first day in Fuller now. But Mom was reading notes, and I wish I would have paid more attention to what she was reading. It wasn't until I got to high school that I had an English teacher that turned me on to Mordecai Rickler. And I read Apprenticeship of Judy Kravitz and a bunch of Rickler's short stories, and then Leonard Cohen. I read
Yeah.
some of his stuff.
Beautiful Losers.
Yeah, yeah, yes. So anyway. Yeah. So I had a good teacher, but they were done grade 13. It shouldn't have taken that long. And by grade 13, I finally had someone that was directing me to reading some great Canadian lit. But before that, we did read Shakespeare plays, thank God, complete plays. But it was the same shit that the kids are reading today. Lord of the fucking Flies. I mean, I I'm sorry for our honors, but I read that in 10th grade, and my daughter, years later in the US in high school, is reading that. And you tell me there's been nothing new that's come out that
Well, as a high school English teacher, let me tell you, there's a reason for that. And it's because if you try to introduce something more contemporary, something newer, that's not been tried and true for decades, that's the easiest way for you to find yourself, under the gun. Somebody in the community is going to question it. You're going to be explaining yourself to your principal, to your school board. If you're a non-tenured teacher, that may be enough right there to make you lose your job. So it's way safer to keep teaching those, same 20 texts that have been taught in high schools for 50 years than it is to try something new that kids might actually get into, might be able to relate to, because
try assigning The Handmaid's Tale.
Right.
or the things they
the funny
carry.
thing is, like Romeo and Juliet and all Shakespeare plays have those elements in them, but high school teachers have found a way. Kids on their own probably aren't going to pick up on the rape and the incest and whatever else might be going on. So unless you point it out to them, you can just gloss right over it and focus on the other stuff. But that's a large part of it. It's just like, well, this has been taught for all these years, it must be okay. Whereas if you try to bring a Black writer in, an LGBTQ writer, an Indigenous writer, yeah, you're just opening yourself up for all kinds of heartache and trouble and maybe losing your job. And yeah, which is sad, but that's where we're at.
That's too bad. I mean, I love Steinbeck, and we studied a lot of Steinbeck, and like The Pearl, Red Pony, like the shorter stuff. And
Of Mice and Men.
Mice and Men. Yes, that was the novel we read. And I loved all that stuff, and I got into Steinbeck. And then, actually, I did read some Steinbeck on my own, so I got to credit that for, like, I read Grapes of Wrath on my own, and I've never read East of Eden. I know it's a gap in my literary appreciation. I need to get to it, but I've read a ton of Steinbeck, Cannery Row, Sweet Thursday, all that stuff. But a lot of it was inspired because I liked Red Pony, and I even liked the Pearl. I thought it was pretty cool.
Oh, you guys are killing me. I'm just going back to. I remember, yeah, reading like James Herriot books in a little hammock in a one backyard. One time we had a backyard. It had two trees and put a hammock between them and read out there when I had the chance. Yeah, you guys are killing me.
Yeah.
Good
All
stuff.
right. Well, we probably need to move on to our featured story a little later than we normally do, but that's okay. So, as I alluded to earlier, this is out of a Swamp Ape review. Again, this is produced by Florida Atlantic University. South Florida is where they're at. And very cool little journal. And this is one of those journals I picked up at AWP in Baltimore. So we're still getting through that pile that I picked up. Talked to one of the editors for quite a while. A very nice young man, very smart, articulate, all those kinds of things, and so on. And it's just a beautifully produced journal, by the way. It's got color reproductions of artwork. It's slick pages, so it must have been very expensive to produce. They've got a South Florida featured section with this green border on it. So anyway, just very, very beautiful. But we're gonna talk about a story that I sent you all, a short story called "From the Bottom of the Seven Seas Lagoon" by Parker Logan, and I'll say more about Parker in just a few minutes, but it seems to be primarily a poet. But this is a short story that he had published here. And let me just read the opening paragraph as I do, and a little brief synopsis of the story. And then I'm really anxious to hear what you guys have to say about "From the Bottom of the Seven Seas Lagoon" by Parker Logan in Swamp Ape Review, Spring 2025, Volume 8. And here we go. It's cold down here as I wait to be rescued, though I don't know how much of me they'll find. At the moment, I'm just a head and a torso with one leg penned underneath a log at the bottom of the Seven Seas Lagoon. I can hear the ferry boat making its trip to the Magic Kingdom. The sound of the engine is loud underwater. I can hear several more engines somewhere else in the pond as well. I imagine it's the rescue team. If I could scream, I would tell them they're looking in the wrong direction. The boats drift further and further away. And so as we read on, we find out that our main character is visiting Disneyland, Disney World, excuse me, from Minneapolis, she and her boyfriend, James. And she's always been a nature enthusiast, loves wild animals, decides to give a beautiful alligator a boop in the nose as you would a puppy, and it kills her. It drags her under the water, and that's all that she wrote. So this entire story is a monologue from this dead woman at the bottom of the lagoon, reflecting back on her life, on her her relationship with James and other men in her life, and her having always this love of nature and wildlife, and how that eventually was going to catch up with her, and certainly it did. And eventually by the end of the story, which I'm not going to mention, there is a very definite sort of conclusion, a denouement, if you will, for this torn up corpse at the bottom of the lagoon, the unexpected turn of events by the end of the story, I would say. But anyway, I'll just kind of stop there and let me turn it over to you guys. Grant, what did you think of this strange little story by Parker Logan?
Yeah, I liked it. I wanted to, well, I think I'd like to, I want to talk about a concept for our auditors, but I don't want to drag too far from the story. But I think what's important for writers is to inhabit the space of the story that you're sharing with your readers. And What I mean by that, let me give you an example. A buddy of mine was directing our town over at the Cedar Falls High School. This was a few years ago. And the kids just weren't getting the emotional impact of the ending of the play. So close to Cedar Falls High, at least the old high school, it's now in a different location. It's brand new, spanking new, but we're talking a few years ago. There's a cemetery close by, and he had the students, all the actors and crew, go out to the cemetery one day, and that was rehearsal. You're just going to hang out in the cemetery, look at all the graves. The kids did this. Next day, when we got to the rehearsal phase of things, the acting was so much more intense, so much more lived in, because they had gone out and experienced this experience. And so what I'm trying to get at here with the story, I think there's people use the word world building, but I want to talk more about inhabiting space. There's a way in which this story moves into the braided essay format of a creative nonfiction, and we inhabit the world of what it is to be an alligator. We get information about alligators birthing and the difficulties they have producing offspring. And we as we're submerged in the water, we got conversations with turtles and crappies. What is it? Crappies? Is that it?
Crappie.
Crappies. Sorry, my bad. I'm not a fisherman. Anyway, crappies, turtles, and so I really feel the writer did a great job of getting into that space, both underwater, but into the world of alligatorness, if you will, and that brings the story to life. So, world building isn't just details and background information and to avoid info dumping and all that. Everybody always talks about world building's about finding the space. And I'll say one more story here from personal level, and Brady will appreciate this. Hockey Night in Canada is no more. After 74 years, there's no more Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday night. Why is that important? Because that was part of my cultural identity. Everything on Saturday night revolved around the hockey game. We didn't go out Saturday nights. We were home at 8 o'clock watching the Leafs on CBC. And my dad would say, "Hey, you want to come over?" But we got the game on. That was just sort of, standard thing. We'd go to my deado's place, that's my grandpa, and watch the games because he had a big solid state color TV. And why am I sharing that? Because for me, that's almost like a portal. We talk about spec fic. You enter into a portal. That's one of the kinds of genres of speculative fiction. And I think this takes us into the portal of alligatorness and under the water. And we actually come out of that portal into another portal at the end, but I don't want to give away the ending. So when I write my Hayden Fuller novels, I always rewatch a Hockey Night in Canada broadcast. I have tons of them that I've recorded. I've got all the Stanley Cup victories from 64 and 63, and I've got half of them from 63 of them from 67. And I just do it to get into the mindset of the world I'm about to write. So I watched Hockey Night in Canada, and suddenly it just brings back all this meaning for me, my ethnic identity, my immigrant status that my grandparents had, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's important for our listeners to when they get ready to work on a project, to think about inhabiting that space. Because, Monty Cliff's acting coach said, when you enter a room, you inhabit that room. Breathe it in, take it in, and then you'll be more alive in the scene. And I think this story really breathes in the lagoon, really breathes in a kind of, I don't want to say what's that, dysphoria, where you're not happy in your body, but there is a kind of otherness of kind of not feeling like you fit in and somehow even being dead, but in this water space and having that space, there's a way of being alive. Like, this is the world that gets me. This is the world that understands me. So excellent job by the writer on that. So that's two bits of advice. One, praising the story for inhabitants. Two, I think for writers in general, it's sort of a method acting thing, but I think it's important to get into a certain mindset when you're writing. So those are my two responses.
Very, very nice. Very good. Yeah. Brady, your thoughts?
Outstanding. And yeah, I concur. Another way to put it maybe, and this isn't as robust a way as you put it, but how I think of this sometimes is the telling details, the truth of that place. What were people like? How did they talk? What did they look like? How did they sound? How did they think? What were their values? And what kinds of details? And so if you're going to capture Toronto in the 60s or in the 70s, the hockey night in Canada, and then the family get together, I mean, the abundance of detail, right? Bring that alive for your reader. As a writer, present that world. And so I think, yeah, Parker Logan does a terrific job. The other observation, and Grant was already beginning to lean into this, this is another one of the stories that we've read over the course of our, now, what did you say, Ted, at the beginning, the 27th year?
36th.
Yeah, 36. No, not 20. Yeah. There's like, this is another one of the horror stories about women's bodies,
Mhm.
right? I've never been, I've been to, excuse me, Disneyland because my wife was from California. And so we've been to Disneyland a bunch of times. I've never been to Disney World. I'm wondering if they, have real live alligators there. But there's this dead body and this consciousness sharing, and they're like getting, parts of the body getting ripped away by different animals and stuff. Like there's this. What this story connects to is so many of the stories that we've read. There's this shout. There's this clarion call or scream that's going on in the culture about women's bodies and some kind of horror. So this is another one, and so I'm not the one to make anything of it. I don't have anything smart to say about it other than the story connects to so many stories that we've talked about in our podcast.
That's a great observation, and frankly, I wasn't thinking of it in that way. But you're absolutely right. I was reminded of this is almost like a subgenre or a genre unto itself of the consciousness of the corpse, the dead person, or whatever. And the examples I'm about to give you aren't quite the same thing, but I think they're in the neighborhood. I always think of that kind of classic and highly anthologized story, Bullet in the Brain by Tobias Wolff, where the protagonist, the main character, goes into a bank, I think it is. It's been a long time since I've read it. I taught it a couple times, many, many years ago. And there's some bank robbers, and the main character gets shot in the head. And for just the split second, while the bullet travels through his brain, he thinks about, his life and all. And so these are kind of his final thoughts. And so this entire short story is just those last few seconds of life and consciousness before the bullet ends his life or whatever. So not quite the same here. But then the other one I really was reminded of, Robert Olin Butler, who I fortunately have gotten to know well enough that I call him Bob when we're together. But years ago, he wrote this really interesting collection of little prose pieces, and I can't remember. I'm not going to be able to get the numbers right, but Bob took two really interesting details and sort of Venn diagrammed them into this approach to this book. He found out, like from some research, like when a head is cut off, when it's been decapitated, it should stay alive for a certain amount of time. There's enough blood in your brain that you should have some consciousness and be able to think for, I forget what it is, a minute and a half or something. I'm making that up, but some amount of time. Well, then he took another statistic, the average number of words that someone says in a minute. And he did some multiplication and figured out that the typical decapitated head could articulate, 267 words before it dies. And so he wrote this series of vignettes of famously decapitated people like Marie Antoinette. I remember Nicole Brown Simpson was one of them, and does this monologue, but every single monologue is exactly that number of words, whatever number he came up with, 267 or whatever it was. So every vignette is exactly the same length. Obviously that takes some revision effort to get that, but really, really fascinating. So what was Marie Antoinette? What were her final thoughts? What would she say to the world in that last couple of minutes before she loses consciousness to blood loss or whatever. What did Nicole Brown Simpson see? What would she say? And it was really beautifully done. It sounds very macabre and very, kind of off the deep end in some ways, but it was just beautifully written and such an interesting concept. Grant, I saw you kind of or shaking your head a little bit. Does that concept, does that do anything for you? Or
Yeah, that sounds macabre and awesome. The what got me thinking was when you talked about Tobias Wolff, and I just wanted to say this is that interesting world building thing again, inhabiting the space. So Wolff inhabits the space of the bank and also the space of Ernest Hemingway, because the guy's name is Anders, I think, which is a riff on Oldie Anderson, and it's right out of The Killers, the way the bad guys talk, and he even says something about the Killers. So we got this kind of quoting of another text, which is wonderful. And then he inhabits the space of thoughts in the brain, but he does this extra trick, which I think is really cool for our auditors to pick up on. It's a way of world building where, and I've stolen it, I've used this, where Wolff says what he did not remember. And he has about 3 or 4 catalog paragraphs where suddenly we get the backstory on this guy. It's like this authorial intrusion where we get all this backstory stuff that Anders doesn't think about, but the writer said he did not remember this, blah 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 blah. He did not remember this, blah 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 blah. And it's like, but you're sharing it with us, so it's a great trick to get the world building in. And then he moves into the inhabited space of the brain, and this wonderful scene of playing baseball. It's a phenomenal story, and so much technique involved. So anyway, when you got talking about Butler, and you'd mentioned Wolff, I just started thinking about how to do that kind of world building in different ways. 2 different inhabited spaces, and then this sort of authorial intrusion that totally works to give us necessary information to fill in the world building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, you remember that story a lot better than I do, so I'm glad you filled in the
Oh,
blanks.
I love that story. I just absolutely love it. Yeah.
Well, I don't think I had read The Killer. I know I hadn't read The Killers before I read, so I didn't even make those connections. So that's so great that you were able to do that. Brady, what are some of your thoughts about the body talking from beyond the grave? Obviously, the Spoon River anthology series poems kind of does a similar thing. I think you've referenced Edgar Lee Masters once or twice in our podcast.
Oh yeah, no, Spoon River Anthologies, and over the course of the last few minutes conversation, that book has been coming back so vividly to mind. It's so great, the speech of the dead in the graves in this small town, Illinois, and yes, all the things they have to say about themselves and one another. Yeah, and what's the old Ambrose Bierce story, right? Where
Occurrence at Elk Creek Bridge.
There you go.
I almost
read that.
That one in my exactly.
Yeah, 100 years. So yeah, the speech of the dead, but how does one say it? Prosopopia? I can't remember. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not adding a damn thing. What Grant said, and the focus has been so often in our podcast about technique and strategy. And so yeah, ignore me and listen to Grant.
Well, no, no, you're great, man. Hey, I was wondering, I want to ask a craft question. I thought maybe you guys would, and this isn't meant as a criticism. This is meant as I'm trying to, like, as a writer, why that choice? Okay, so maybe you guys can let me in on what you think. But I thought this was very intriguing, and Parker does this several times in the piece. So let me explain myself. So I'm looking at page 32, and the writing is I usually at the middle of about 2/3 down the page. I usually can't sit still for long enough without causing a disturbance, but now that I'm a corpse, I have such a clear view of what's happening. My body is the attraction. I can feel the minnows swimming underneath my back, and schools of fish come by to get a bite. I see the shimmering of more scales in the distance. Snakes slither through the water. I see the shadows of duck bodies taking laps above me. I hear the boats. They're circling now. They're right above me. How do they know where I'm at? And I'm wondering why the emphasis on the sensory I. Like as a writer, I would often take out that filter, but this is a Parker does this throughout the piece. So I think there's a purpose behind it. I would probably write something like minnows swim underneath my back and schools of fish get a bite. You know what I'm saying? Like I wouldn't say I can feel, because for me that's implied, but there's something about the emphasis on the I that's so important. And I'm wondering, is it because it's a dead consciousness speak? I want to get your guys' take on that. I mean, it runs throughout this. Um
Yeah,
I
because
can't.
eventually on the next page he says, "I can't really feel it." Italicized, really. I can't really feel it, but there is something nice about imagining those little mouths exploring my body like this. So yes, that's another example of that. Well,
Mhm.
I didn't think about it. I have a thought in response to your
I want to
question,
hear it. Yeah.
but I don't know, Brady. Do you want to? I don't want to steal anything from your thunder. Do you have any thoughts on any answer to Grant's question?
I got nothing. I got no insights. No, I mean, don't we have the sense, like, what is the character's name? What is the speaker's name? Like, don't we have the sense that she has not been well heard in life?
Yes.
And so that here in the end, here in death, is an assertion of the self. I want to
Yeah.
speak. I want to say, this is my experience. This is what matters, or this is what I'm getting. And even if no one is listening, there's the assertion, because yeah, it just sort of seems like the narrator talks about James and the regard that James holds them in, but otherwise, and we've seen this pattern too in the stories, the sense of somewhat being ignored in life. So, in response to Grant's question, that seems to me, or at least in my read, that energy of the I seems to be speaking to some of that.
Yeah, because there's like you're spot on with that. On page 30, there's this really short paragraph, but how could I be anything than other than who I am? Why did he marry me if I didn't want that? Later, another short paragraph. I wish James were here to see this. We'd both be dead, but at least I could tell him about it. Um, so there's this feeling, like you said, Brady, being ignored. So maybe that's a way of stamping the experience, making it more real. Or yeah, I just found it interesting. I can't see the lights anymore, but I still feel the boom. I look up. I am in the shadow of something big. I look at the jaws. I feel the teeth opening around my body. I mean, I do this, I do this. Instead of just going right to, that filter is there. And I think it works for the story, but I couldn't articulate the why. So you're helping me a lot with that.
No,
Thank you.
I like that. I like Brady's answer, which is very different from mine. But I got a feeling that if Parker were here, I'm guessing he couldn't answer it any better than we can. I think I think one of those things that you do sort of organically, and if it's happening with intention, it's mainly your subconscious's intention, but maybe not. Maybe it was more deliberate. But what I think one of the payoffs of that is, whether it was deliberate or not, consciously deliberate, is that it really emphasizes that there is this consciousness that has survived beyond death, because it's just really, it's very observant, and it continues to have these really profound thoughts. It continues to have a sense of humor. I mean, some of the things he thinks, or she
That's very
thinks,
funny.
very funny. And so I think for the ending to be, I don't want to go there because I don't want to give it away necessarily, but I think for the ending to be more, more plausible and make more sense within the context of this narrative, the emphasis on the sustainability of consciousness is really, really important. And so, again, my guess would be Parker, whatever he did here, that wasn't necessarily something he was considering, but I could be wrong. Maybe it was a very deliberate narrative choice or whatever. But anyway, that would be my sense. So I think what Brady says makes a lot of sense. I think what I say makes sense to me, at least. So there is that. So, hey, we're kind of running along here. I know, Grant, you've got rehearsal to get to eventually here, but one of the points I wanted to make about this story, besides the fact it is part of a sort of narrative tradition of the voice from beyond, or almost from beyond, speaking to us, and we can think of all sorts of examples. One of the things that started me on this collection of lectures that I'm developing for publication and writing these lengthy commentaries on. The first lecture I gave, which was in Hue, Vietnam in 2018, it was on the importance of expressive writing, which we tend in the U.S. to call creative writing. And one of the points I get into there, and I've really expanded on in the commentaries, is that, in high schools and colleges, the big emphasis is on the research paper. In junior highs and then early years of high school, kids are started the process of being taught how to do documentation and how to write a research paper and how to develop a thesis and narrow the thesis and how do you do MLA citations and on and on and on. And then when you get to college, freshman year, first year writing, whatever, is all about the research paper and yada, yada, yada. And here's the thing. Most kids hate it. Most kids are awful at it. Teachers hate teaching it. Teachers hate grading it. And quite honestly, they're very bad at grading it. And so it really puts a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths to be forced the research paper, especially at such an early age. And quite honestly, I don't think I really learned how to write a research paper properly until I was working on my doctorate in my 40s. In spite of all the instruction, until I really, really had to do it, and I was starting to try to do it for academic publication and blah, blah, blah. That's when I really figured out, oh, this is how all this kind of works and so forth and so on. Whereas the typical kid, teenager, really can be, can really love creative writing. They can really love writing a narrative about a dead body in a swamp, or they can really love writing poetry, haiku. They can love writing, memoir, not creative nonfiction. And yet we don't give them hardly any opportunity to do that in high school and in college. If they do it in college, it's usually an elective unless they major in creative writing or something. And I think that's really a shame, because I think you can learn a lot of really important skills through creative writing. And one of the points I make in my commentaries is that each genre, short story, poetry, creative nonfiction, whatever it is, has a sort of logic of its own that you have to learn and have to be able to follow. Sometimes you break that logic. But it isn't as if it's completely willy-nilly without form. So just as you would have to learn the research paper form, the thesis, the body paragraph, the concluding paragraph, and all that stuff, you also have to learn narrative form. And then you also, to do a good job, you have to be able to do research and incorporate that, seamlessly into your writing. And Grant already kind of mentioned what I wanted to talk about earlier. We learn a lot about South Florida wildlife. And one has to imagine that Parker had to do some fairly serious research, even though maybe he grew up here. He didn't know exactly all this stuff about alligators and crappie and snapping turtles, and, on and on and on, ecosystems of swamps. And so the last few years that I taught high school, I really made sure that kids had an opportunity to write creatively, to write expressively. I would have them kind of explain what they were up to structurally. I would have them do a kind of bibliography based on the kind of research they had to do that was specific to whatever they were doing. Even if they were writing memoir, they didn't necessarily remember all the details of this experience or that experience. So they had to, look up online, what were the streets involved in this memory? Or, I remember going to a soccer game, but I don't remember the rules of soccer. What are the rules of soccer? Anyway, the point is that expressive writing really does give you the opportunity to do the same kinds of intellectual skill sets that you learn allegedly by doing a research paper, but you can learn them much better by writing a really good piece of expressive writing as opposed to a really shitty research paper, which is describes about 99% of the research papers I graded over 38 years, plus all the years I taught in first year writing programs at University of Illinois and other places. So I don't know. What do you think? Why do, well, I know why we probably privilege the research paper, but I think it's a real shame. I think we would be better off giving much more time and energy and letting kids explore expressive writing. Brady, you obviously come from a program that your particular area focused on academic writing, but do you think a lot of kids would benefit by having more exposure to expressive writing?
Okay, yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I guess I would argue that we could do it in the right kinds of classes. We could do it all because I am a fan, not so much of the research paper, but of argumentative essays. Like I like trying to, and I think it's invaluable to try to teach people how to argue a case, how to present an argument, how to be logical, how to muster evidence, reason, seek to persuade people of your point of view. Like I think that's invaluable. But for all the reasons that you've said, those kinds of concerns can be gotten at, those kinds of experiences can be gotten in all kinds of writing. And so, yeah, I think a broader palette would be in order, but I wouldn't myself want to lose. Not the research paper, just sort of this bloated, awful thing. It's no, I never enjoyed teaching that, and reading them was, serious work. But argumentative, the shorter argumentative essay to learn those skills in a nation that doesn't, that sometimes seems to have dispensed with logic and reason and reasonableness and evidence and the basis of science. I think there's still room for that kind of writing too. So I'm not wholly disagreeing, but I would like to see it broader. Yeah, I think if we could do some richer mix of those things, that would be great.
Yeah, yeah. Grant, your thoughts on
Yeah, I'm
privileging the research paper over other kinds of writing or whatever?
I in my intro to film class and my other film classes and the times I have been able to teach literature, I taught a crime lit class. I always encourage, I not necessarily force students, but I encourage them. There's always two options, and one is an argumentative paper, as Brady was saying. So based on what we've read or a film we've watched or whatever, talk about Sinners as a vampire film and why what new is it bringing to the genre, or to write a transgressive vampire story or opening scene for a vampire film that's doing something new. And my and the students always have to write an argumentative paper in those classes, but I always give you have to at least out of the three papers, one's got to be argumentative, but the other two you could do the creative writing option. And I get quite a few students that do it. Some of them even make a short film, on an iPhone or something. And so I agree. There's a lot of understanding of form and narrative and then I asked them to write up a couple of paragraphs explaining what they learned from, say, the text that they use to make their film or their screenplay. And I find it a good educational tool. So in all of my film classes, which I get to teach, that's kind of a thing I do. Conversely, not every semester, but some semesters, when I teach craft of fiction, I have the students do a craft analysis, kind of like what I was talking about earlier about inhabiting space. That could be, you could take that concept of inhabiting space and look at P.D. James's Unsuitable Job for a Woman and pursue Cordelia Gray's narrative as a character who, investigating a murder, lives in the little cottage where the guy was killed, puts on his clothes, sleeps in his bed, wears the belt that later rescues her when she falls down a well. She starts to empathize with him by sitting at the table he ate at, all of this kind of stuff. So she literally does what I was talking about a few minutes ago, inhabits the space to solve the crime. So I think there's something to be said for both. So like in my craft classes, I do want like some analysis of the use of defamiliarization in this short story, or the the use of point of view in this story or whatever. So I think that's important to learn, and then that makes them better workshoppers when they workshop each other's work. So getting both sides of the brain going.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot more we could probably say. I almost forgot to read Parker Logan's little contributor's note, which I want to make sure I do it. So while I'm reading it, maybe you guys can think about final words that you want to share with our audience, and then we'll call it an episode. But this is the contributor's note. Parker Logan is from Orlando, Florida, and lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His poetry has appeared in Gulf Coast, Split Lip Magazine, HAD, and elsewhere. He works as teen library tech at the East Baton Rouge Parish Library System, so fellow librarian. See more of his work at parkerpoetry.org. Social media includes Twitter X at ParkerLogan13 and on Instagram at the Peter Parker Logan. And a lot of his work is available online, I've discovered, poems especially. So you certainly can check out his work, even if you don't happen to have a copy of Swamp Ape Review. All right, let me kick it around for one last time from final thoughts. Brady.
Yeah, read the damn book. Yeah, have books in the house. And I was thinking back in middle school, a science teacher liked books and had in his lab 2 shelves of books, just a couple hundred books. And if you just said to that teacher, I'm going to borrow this book, and you had to bring it back, it was a small lending library. And I read 50 books out of that, or more. Have books in the house. And then I think this is not for our auditors. They're going to be literary types, but for them to say to other folks, you don't have to read 100 books a year, but what if you read one a month? One book a month. That's a start. That would be an accomplishable goal for anyone. Set the phone aside, read a damn book.
Yeah, exactly. Grant.
Yeah, a couple of things. I was thinking about what Brady said. It always amazes me when they ask politicians, to name a book they've read recently, and they stumble over that answer, which tells me they don't read much either, which is very problematic. I think it was really interesting when you read the bio. Coming back to something I said earlier, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I find in the field of creative nonfiction, there's a lot of folks that also do poetry. And there's a lot of poets that do creative nonfiction. And even though this is a work of fiction, I did feel that braided narrative style of creative nonfiction. So yeah, I see some linkages here between this, Logan as a poet, but also having, that sort of dipping the toes in the water of creative nonfiction to write fiction. So that's really cool. And there is poetic language in the piece. I think it's a really strong story. Really appreciated reading it, and read more books. That's all I got to say. I'm with Brady and you, Ted, of course, on this. Yeah, read books, and I've been trying to do that more in the evening instead of watching a movie before I go to bed, because it's been helping me sleep better. I don't know.
I'm not sure that's actually
It was not the wildest endorsement ever.
Although what I'm saying is, there's something about the movement, whatever that is, that the video has that I think doesn't make me restful.
Well, no, I mean, the videos stimulate the brain, and whereas the reading, creates whatever waves those are that actually help you to relax and go to sleep. So that's why most people don't fall asleep.
I'm not saying the work is so boring that it puts me to sleep. I'm saying it's helpful.
Right. All right. Well, unfortunately, that's going to be our last word. Thanks a lot, Grant. But no, that sounds good. So I will be in touch with you guys individually about various projects and things, and then also we'll get together next month. And so thanks for making the time. Thanks our listeners and viewers. Thanks, Parker, for a great story. Thanks, editors of Swamp Ape Review. I loved talking to you in Baltimore, and I'm going to hit stop recording.